The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Atlanta International Airport as passengers hurried to their gates. Among them walked a well-dressed black woman in her mid-40s, pulling a sleek navy blue carry-on suitcase. Her crisp business suit and confident stride spoke of someone used to navigating corporate boardrooms, not someone who'd soon be at the center of an incident that would shock the nation. As she approached Gate B-23, she double-checked her first-class ticket. Everything was in order, just as it had been the hundreds of times she'd flown before. The gate area buzzed with the usual pre-boarding energy. Business people on their laptops, families corralling excited children, and tired travelers hoping to catch a few minutes of rest. When first-class boarding was announced, she stood up, smoothed her jacket, and walked to the line with the other premium passengers. That's when things started to feel different. The young flight attendant at the gate kept glancing between her face and her ticket, then back again. "Ma'am, could you step aside?" "I need to verify something," the attendant said, voice tinged with an edge that made nearby passengers look up from their phones. "Is there a problem?" she asked calmly, having dealt with similar situations before. By now, other first-class passengers were boarding, walking past her with curious glances. Some slowed their pace, watching the scene unfold. The flight attendant called over a colleague, who also examined the ticket with unnecessary scrutiny. "This is a first-class ticket," the second attendant said, stating the obvious. "Could we see some additional identification?" She reached into her purse and produced her ID, maintaining her composure even as she noticed people starting to film with their phones. A businessman behind her sighed loudly, checking his watch. "Can we get moving?" "Some of us have places to be," he grumbled. The situation should have been resolved quickly, but somehow it wasn't. More airline staff gathered, their whispered conversations and sidelong glances making it clear this was about more than just routine verification. Other passengers continued boarding, some averting their eyes uncomfortably, others openly staring at the unfolding scene. "Your ticket seems to be in order," the first attendant finally admitted. "But there seems to be a—" She paused, searching for words, "a discrepancy in our system." A younger passenger nearby couldn't stay quiet any longer. "What discrepancy?" "Her ticket's valid. We all saw it." "This is ridiculous." Others nodded in agreement, while some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, pretending to be absorbed in their phones. The woman stood there, her expression neutral, but her eyes taking in everything. The body language of the staff, the reactions of other passengers, the phones recording the incident. She'd been through similar situations before, but this time was different. This time, she knew something the airline staff didn't. As more passengers gathered around and the tension in the air grew thicker, she reached for her phone, seemingly to make a call. The head flight attendant approached with a forced smile. "Ma'am, perhaps we could discuss this at the gate." Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of a story that would soon make headlines across the country and change airline policies forever. The true identity of this passenger would leave everyone not just speechless, but questioning their own assumptions and biases. The scene at Gate B-23 was about to become more than just another airport incident. It would become a moment that would make people across the nation stop, think, and realize that sometimes things aren't quite what they seem. And that change often comes from the most unexpected situations. The tension in the aircraft cabin was growing thicker by the minute. After finally being allowed to board, the well-dressed black woman had taken her assigned first-class seat, but the atmosphere around her remained uneasy. Flight attendants kept walking past, throwing glances her way while whispering into their handheld phones. It was the kind of treatment that made other passengers squirm in their seats, unsure whether to speak up or stay quiet. A gentleman across the aisle cleared his throat and spoke up. "Excuse me, is everything okay? This seems a bit excessive." His genuine concern was met with nervous smiles from the crew, who quickly rushed past without responding. That's when things took another turn. A passenger 2 rows behind, A woman clutching her designer purse like a shield raised her hand to get the attention of a passing flight attendant. "I need to speak with you," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I'm concerned about that passenger's attitude. She seems confrontational." Several heads turned in disbelief. The black woman had been nothing but calm and professional throughout the entire ordeal, speaking in measured tones and presenting her documents whenever asked. The accusation hung in the air like thick smoke, making everyone uncomfortable. The head flight attendant, a tall woman with graying hair pulled into a tight bun, approached the first-class section. She carried herself with an air of authority that suggested she was about to make the situation either much better or much worse. "Ma'am," she addressed the black passenger, "we've received some concerns from other passengers." "What concerns exactly?" the woman asked calmly, looking directly into the flight attendant's eyes. "I've complied with every request, shown all my documentation, and I'm sitting in my assigned seat." Her voice was steady, professional, the voice of someone who'd navigated difficult situations before. By now, phones were out again, recording the interaction. A young college student a few rows back whispered to her seatmate, "This is going viral for sure. I can't believe this is happening in 2024. The head flight attendant shifted uncomfortably, aware of the growing number of cameras pointed in her direction. "It's not about documentation anymore," she said, lowering her voice. "It's about ensuring all our passengers feel comfortable." A businessman in the row behind spoke up, his voice carrying through the cabin. "The only ones making people uncomfortable are the airline staff. This is ridiculous." Several passengers nodded in agreement, while others buried their faces deeper in their magazines, trying to avoid involvement. The flight attendant's response was to reach for the cabin phone. Within moments, her whispered conversation with the cockpit changed everything. The aircraft's intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a slight delay due to a passenger situation. Please remain seated while we sort this out." Groans and frustrated sighs filled the cabin. A mother trying to calm her restless child looked at her watch and muttered, "We're already running late." The tension was building, and everyone could feel it. Through it all, the black woman remained composed, though anyone watching closely enough might have noticed her typing something on her phone. There was a subtle shift in her demeanor, not nervousness, but rather a kind of quiet anticipation, as if she knew something nobody else did. The next few minutes would prove crucial. As the captain's footsteps could be heard coming down the aisle, nobody on that plane realized they were about to witness something that would change air travel policies forever. The woman's true identity was still hidden, but soon, very soon, everyone would understand why she had maintained such remarkable composure throughout this ordeal. The captain emerged from the cockpit, his heavy footsteps echoing down the aisle. He was a tall man with silver-streaked hair, wearing his authority like a shield as he approached the first-class section. The entire cabin fell silent, watching the scene unfold like a slow-motion movie nobody wanted to be part of. "Ma'am," the captain addressed the black woman, his voice firm but careful, clearly aware of the many phones recording the situation. "I understand there's been some confusion about your presence in first class." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "For the comfort and safety of all passengers, I'm going to have to ask you to deplane." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. The woman looked at him steadily, her composure unwavering. "Captain," she replied, her voice clear and measured, "I'd like you to explain exactly what safety concerns you're referring to." The question hung in the air like a challenge, professional but direct. A young woman in business class couldn't contain herself anymore. "This is absolutely shameful," she called out. "We've all been watching. She's done nothing wrong." Others joined in, their voices creating a chorus of disapproval. The captain raised his hands, trying to maintain control of the situation. "This isn't about right or wrong. We have protocols to follow when passengers express concerns." The only concerning behavior I've seen is from your crew, interrupted an elderly gentleman, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. More passengers nodded in agreement, while others filmed everything on their phones. Through the growing chaos, the black woman remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Captain," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife through butter, "I believe you should know that removing a passenger without valid cause is a violation of federal aviation regulations." The precision of her words caused the captain to pause, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Two airport police officers appeared at the gate entrance, summoned by the crew. They made their way down the aisle, their presence adding another layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. Passengers watched in disbelief as this situation continued to escalate. The woman reached for her purse, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Several people tensed, unsure what was about to happen. The police officers stopped a few feet away, waiting. "Before we proceed any further," she said, looking directly at the captain, "I think it's time I showed you something else besides my ticket." Her hand emerged from her purse, holding what looked like an official identification card. A flight attendant leaned in to look at the ID, and her eyes widened. She quickly whispered something to the captain, whose face suddenly drained of color. The police officers exchanged glances, their stance shifting from authoritative to uncertain. The woman stood up slowly, smoothing her jacket. "Now," she said, her voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there before, "I suggest we discuss the real reason I'm on this flight." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted dramatically. Passengers who had been filming lowered their phones slightly, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. The crew members who had been so insistent about her removal now looked like they wished they could disappear into thin air. Little did they know, this moment would soon be talked about in every major news outlet across the country. The next few minutes would transform what seemed like a routine case of discrimination into something that would shake the entire airline industry to its core. As the woman prepared to reveal her true identity, nobody on that plane realized they were about to become part of a story that would change air travel forever. The identity card in her hand caught the overhead lighting, its gold federal seal gleaming. She handed it to the captain, whose eyes grew wider with each passing second as he read. The head flight attendant peered over his shoulder, and her hand flew to her mouth in shock. The police officers took one look at the ID and immediately stepped back, their entire demeanor changing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the woman said, her voice now carrying a different kind of authority, "I'm the newly appointed head of aviation safety at the Federal Aviation Administration." The words fell like heavy stones in a quiet pond, creating ripples of gasps and whispers throughout the cabin. The captain's face had turned an interesting shade of pale. "Doctor," he stammered, suddenly struggling to maintain his previous authoritative tone, "I wasn't aware. We had no notification of your—" "That was precisely the point," she replied calmly. "This is part of our new Undercover assessment program, evaluating how airlines handle passenger interactions, particularly instances of potential discrimination." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And I must say, this flight has been illuminating." The passenger who had complained earlier about the woman's attitude was now shrinking in her seat, trying to make herself as small as possible. Other passengers were alternating between looks of shock and satisfaction, many still recording every moment on their phones. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Mom, what's happening?" His mother, beaming with pride, replied, "Justice, honey. We're watching justice happen." The airline's ground staff had gathered at the entrance of the plane, having been alerted to the situation. A man in a crisp suit, clearly a senior airline official, was practically running down the jet bridge. The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed completely, from tension to a mix of awe and anticipation. "For the past 6 months," the FAA official continued, "we've been conducting similar assessments across multiple airlines. The incidents we've documented will be part of a comprehensive report to Congress. She looked directly at the captain. Today's events will feature prominently in that report. The senior airline official had reached the first-class cabin, slightly out of breath. "Doctor," he began, his voice dripping with concern, "on behalf of the airline, I want to express our deepest." She raised her hand gently, stopping him mid-sentence. Now isn't the time for apologies. Now is the time for action. She turned to address everyone in the cabin. What happened here today isn't just about me. It's about every passenger who has ever faced unfair treatment but didn't happen to have a federal badge in their pocket. Phones were still recording, capturing every word. Social media was already buzzing with clips from earlier in the incident, and news trucks were beginning to gather at the airport. This routine flight was about to become tomorrow's headline news. One of the flight attendants, who had initially questioned her ticket, was now standing quietly in the gallery, tears of shame rolling down her cheeks. The FAA official noticed and softened her tone slightly. "This isn't about punishment," she said. "It's about learning and changing. Real change comes from acknowledging our mistakes and doing better." The entire cabin sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a random incident anymore. It was a moment that would be referenced in training materials and policy documents for years to come. The passengers on this flight had just become part of aviation history, though not in the way anyone had expected when they boarded. The next 30 minutes on that plane became a whirlwind of activity that nobody would soon forget. The airline's regional director had arrived, his tie slightly crooked from rushing to the gate. Behind him, a small army of airline officials huddled near the plane's entrance, all wearing expressions of deep concern. "We need to handle this situation immediately," the regional director announced, wiping sweat from his forehead. His eyes darted nervously between the FAA official and the phones still recording every moment. "Perhaps we could discuss this in private." The FAA official remained seated, her posture relaxed but professional. "I think we've had enough private discussions today," she replied. "Transparency is exactly what this situation needs." Several passengers nodded in agreement, some even breaking into spontaneous applause. The captain, who had been standing awkwardly by the cockpit door, now approached again. His earlier authority had melted away, replaced by genuine remorse. "Doctor," he began, his voice heavy with emotion, "I've been flying for 27 years. Today has taught me that experience doesn't matter if we're not willing to examine our own biases." A flight attendant who had watched the entire scene unfold brought water to the first-class cabin, her hands trembling slightly as she offered drinks to everyone involved. The small gesture of service seemed to highlight how drastically the atmosphere had changed. Passengers who had been strangers just an hour ago were now engaged in passionate discussions about what they'd witnessed. An elderly couple in business class shared their own stories of discrimination with nearby passengers. A group of college students were already planning to use this incident for their social justice project. "Your airline's training protocols will need complete revision," the FAA official explained to the regional director, her voice firm but constructive. "But more importantly, we need to address the culture that made today's events possible." The woman who had complained earlier about the official's attitude finally gathered the courage to speak up again, this time with a very different message. I owe you an apology," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't realize I was part of the problem, but I was." Outside the plane, word had spread through the terminal. Passengers at nearby gates were filming through the windows, and airline staff from other flights had gathered to witness the unfolding situation. Someone had tipped off the local news, and cameras were setting up near the security checkpoint. The regional director made a series of rapid phone calls, his face growing more concerned with each one. "The CEO would like to speak with you directly," he told the FAA official, holding out his phone. She politely declined with a small smile. "This isn't about one conversation with a CEO," she explained, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is about every passenger who boards a plane in this country. We need systemic change, not just apologies. A young flight attendant in training, who had been observing everything from the gallery, raised her hand tentatively. Will you be involved in our new training? She asked, hopefully. The question seemed to capture everyone's attention. The FAA official's expression softened. This experience will certainly be part of future training across all airlines. Today's events, as unfortunate as they were, will help create positive change in aviation. As airline officials continued to scramble and passengers shared their contact information to stay updated on the story, something remarkable was happening. This flight, which had started with an act of discrimination, was transforming into a powerful moment of learning and unity. Everyone in that cabin knew they were part of something much bigger than a simple flight delay. By sunset, the airport incident had exploded across social media like wildfire. The first video, posted by a college student in row 14, hit 1 million views within hours. News helicopters hovered above the airport, their cameras focused on the terminal where it all happened. Inside the airport's main conference room, a hastily arranged press conference was about to begin. "My phone hasn't stopped buzzing," said one passenger who had witnessed everything, speaking to a crowd of reporters. "Friends are sending me links to the videos, asking if I was really there. It's surreal to watch something you saw in person go viral so quickly." The airline's public relations team scrambled to handle the situation, but they were fighting a losing battle against the speed of social media. Clips of the captain asking the FAA official to deplane were being shared thousands of times per minute. Comments flooded in from around the world, with people sharing their own experiences of discrimination during air travel. A popular morning show host tweeted, "Breaking. High-ranking FAA official experiences discrimination on flight. Story developing." Within minutes, every major news network had picked up the story. The hashtag #RespectAnthestes started trending nationwide. In the airport's VIP lounge, the FAA official sat calmly reviewing footage from passengers who had offered to share their recordings. Each video showed a different angle of the incident, creating a complete picture of what had transpired. "This isn't just about one flight anymore," she told a reporter who had managed to get through security. "This is about changing how we treat each other in public spaces." The airline's CEO, watching the situation unfold from the corporate headquarters across the country, ordered his private jet prepared for immediate departure. His team had prepared 3 different public statements, but none seemed adequate for the magnitude of what had happened. Meanwhile, other passengers from the flight were being interviewed by news crews in the terminal. The elderly gentleman who had spoken up during the incident shared his perspective. "In all my years of flying, I've never seen anything quite like this. But what amazed me most wasn't the discrimination. Sadly, we've all seen that before. What amazed me was watching justice unfold in real time." Social media influencers and celebrities began sharing the story with their millions of followers. A famous musician postponed his upcoming concert to film a video response, sharing his own experiences with profiling at airports. Civil rights organizations released statements calling for industry-wide changes in airline policies. The young flight attendant in training, who had witnessed everything, gave an emotional interview to a local news station. "Today changed how I see my role completely," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "We're not just serving drinks and giving safety instructions. We're responsible for making sure every single passenger feels respected and valued." Back in the terminal, travelers waiting for other flights gathered around television screens showing news coverage of the incident. Spontaneous discussions broke out among strangers, sharing their thoughts and experiences. An impromptu support group formed near Gate B-23, with people from different backgrounds coming together to talk about creating change. The airline's stock price began to drop as investors worried about the public relations crisis. But something unexpected was happening too. Other airlines started releasing statements about their own commitments to diversity and inclusion, trying to get ahead of the story. As evening fell, the incident had become more than just a viral moment. It had sparked a national conversation about respect, dignity, and equal treatment in air travel. The videos continued to spread, but now they were accompanied by thoughtful discussions about how to prevent similar incidents in the future. The FAA officials' planned undercover assessment had revealed far more than she had anticipated, and the impact was growing larger by the minute. Nobody could have predicted that one flight would unleash such a powerful wave of change across the entire aviation industry. The next morning, the FAA headquarters buzzed with unprecedented activity. The conference room was packed with senior officials, all gathered to address what had become the biggest aviation story of the year. The undercover assessment had revealed far more than anyone had expected. The FAA official sat at the head of the table, stacks of printed emails and reports spread before her. Yesterday wasn't just about one incident, she began, her voice steady and clear. It was about thousands of similar incidents that happen every day, most of which go unreported. Outside, television crews had set up camp on the street, their satellite trucks creating a metal forest in the parking lot. Inside, phones rang constantly as airline executives from across the country tried to schedule urgent meetings to discuss their policies. "We have received over 10,000 emails since yesterday," announced a staff member, looking up from his laptop. "People from all over the world are sharing their own stories of discrimination during air travel. This has opened a floodgate." The airline's CEO finally appeared on camera, looking tired but determined. His prepared statement acknowledged the gravity of the situation. "What happened yesterday was a complete failure on our part. We're not here to make excuses. We're here to make changes." As he spoke, the airline's new initiatives appeared on screen. Mandatory monthly training for all staff, revision of passenger interaction protocols, and the creation of a passenger advocacy board. But the public wanted more than just promises. A group of flight attendants from different airlines had started an online petition calling for industry-wide changes. "We're the face of aviation," their statement read. "We need better tools and training to ensure every passenger feels safe and respected." The FAA official's phone buzzed with a message. Congress wanted her to testify about the incident and her broader findings. As she read the message, she thought back to all the subtle discrimination she'd witnessed during her undercover assessment program. In the airport terminal where it all began, things were different today. Staff moved with new awareness, watching their own behavior more carefully. Passengers talked openly about yesterday's events, sharing the videos and discussing what they would have done in that situation. The young flight attendant trainee who had witnessed everything was now being interviewed by the airline's training department. "We need to hear from people like you," they told her. "Help us understand how to make things better." Back at FAA headquarters, the official prepared for a press conference. Her team had compiled preliminary findings from her 6-month undercover assessment. The numbers were shocking. Hundreds of documented cases of bias, both subtle and overt. "This isn't about pointing fingers," she practiced saying to her reflection. "This is about fixing a system that has allowed discrimination to become routine." Her words would need to strike a balance between firmness and hope. The airline industry was watching closely. Other carriers began reviewing their own policies, not wanting to be caught in a similar situation. Insurance companies started asking questions about discrimination liability. Change was happening, faster than anyone had expected. A pilots' association released a statement supporting the need for change. "We're responsible for more than just flying the plane. We're responsible for ensuring every passenger's dignity is protected from the moment they step on board." As evening approached, the FAA official reviewed her notes one last time before facing the press. The incident had triggered something bigger than anyone could have predicted. A complete re-examination of how the airline industry treated its passengers. Outside her window, she could see more news vans arriving. Tomorrow, she would present her findings to the world. But today's story wasn't just about statistics and policies. It was about human dignity and the right to travel without fear of discrimination. 3 weeks after the incident, airports across the country looked different. At training centers in every major city, flight crews gathered for new mandatory sessions on passenger respect and dignity. The atmosphere was serious but hopeful, as veteran crew members shared experiences with newcomers. "Watch this footage carefully," a trainer said, playing the now famous video from the flight. "Notice how small actions and words can snowball into something much bigger." The room fell silent as they watched the scene unfold again, many seeing themselves in the crew members' actions. The FAA officials' Undercover program had expanded, with more agents now flying incognito on random flights. But something unexpected was happening too. Passengers had become more vigilant, more willing to speak up when they saw unfair treatment. A flight attendant with 20 years of experience stood up during one training session, her voice shaking slightly. "For years, we followed procedures without questioning them. But now I ask myself before every interaction, am I treating this person the way I'd want my own family to be treated?" At major airports, new signs appeared near check-in counters. "Respect is our first priority, and every passenger deserves dignity." These weren't just empty words anymore. They were backed by new policies and consequences for violations. The airline from the original incident had transformed its entire training program. New employees now spent their first day watching interviews with passengers who had faced discrimination. "We need to feel these stories in our hearts," the head of training explained, "not just learn them in our heads." A popular travel website added a new feature. Passengers could now rate their flights specifically on how respectfully they were treated. Airlines watched these ratings closely, knowing that millions of potential customers were making decisions based on them. The young flight attendant trainee who witnessed the original incident had become an unexpected voice for change. Speaking at a conference, she shared her perspective. "That day showed me that standing by silently is the same as being part of the problem. We all have a responsibility to speak up." In airport break rooms, conversations had changed. Crew members openly discussed challenging situations and how to handle them better. "Remember the FAA official" became a common phrase, reminding everyone that appearances can be deceiving and every passenger deserves respect. The airline industry's biggest insurance companies started offering reduced rates to carriers with strong anti-discrimination programs. Suddenly, treating passengers fairly wasn't just the right thing to do, it was good business. A group of pilots created an anonymous reporting system where crew members could share concerns about discriminatory behavior without fear of retaliation. Within weeks, the data helped identify patterns that needed addressing. The original video had now been viewed over 50 million times, but newer videos were appearing too. Positive ones, showing airline staff going above and beyond to ensure every passenger felt welcomed and respected. In airport terminals, passengers noticed subtle but important changes. Gate agents made more eye contact. Security staff spoke more politely. Flight attendants took extra time with passengers who needed it. The whole atmosphere felt more human. Training programs now included scenarios based on real incidents, teaching staff how to recognize and prevent discrimination before it escalated. "It's not enough to avoid being part of the problem," a trainer explained. "We need to actively be part of the solution." As the changes spread across the industry, something remarkable happened. Customer satisfaction scores began rising across all airlines. It turned out that treating people with respect wasn't just the right thing to do. It made flying a better experience for everyone. 6 months after the incident that changed aviation history, the halls of Congress buzzed with anticipation. The FAA official who had sparked this revolution was about to present her findings to the Transportation Committee. The room was packed with industry leaders, civil rights advocates, and media from around the world. As she approached the podium, she carried with her thousands of stories, not just her own experience, but the voices of countless passengers who had come forward since that day. The silence in the room was electric as she began to speak. What happened on that flight 6 months ago wasn't unique, she began, her voice steady and clear. What was unique was that someone with authority was there to document it. Today, I'm here to speak for those who didn't have a federal badge in their pocket when they faced discrimination. In the audience sat familiar faces from that fateful flight. The young flight attendant trainee, now a training coordinator for her airline, watched with pride. The elderly passenger who had spoken up that day had flown in specially to attend. Even the captain, who had ordered her removal, was present, now an advocate for airline policy reform. Our 6-month investigation revealed over 3,000 documented cases of passenger discrimination, she continued, displaying charts on the screen behind her. But numbers don't tell the whole story. Behind each incident is a human being who just wanted to travel with dignity. The changes sparked by that single flight had spread far beyond what anyone expected. Airlines reported a 40% drop in passenger complaints. Customer satisfaction scores had reached record highs. But more importantly, people's stories were different now. A mother from the Midwest stood up during the public comment section. Last week, my daughter, who uses a wheelchair, flew alone for the first time, she shared, her voice thick with emotion. The crew didn't just help her, they made her feel welcome. That wouldn't have happened 6 months ago. The airline industry's transformation had become a model for other sectors. Hotels, restaurants, and retail chains were studying the new aviation protocols, learning how to better serve diverse populations. The ripple effects seemed endless. The original video, which had gone viral 6 months ago, was now being used in business schools as a case study in corporate responsibility. Students analyzed not just what went wrong, but how one incident could catalyze positive change across an entire industry. Near the end of her testimony, the FAA official held up her first-class ticket from that day. This piece of paper started something remarkable, she said. But the real change wasn't in new policies or training programs. It was in helping people see each other as human beings first. The new legislation she proposed would ensure these changes became permanent. Airlines would face regular audits of their treatment of passengers. Training programs would be standardized across the industry. Most importantly, passengers would have clear channels to report discrimination without fear of dismissal. Back at the airport where it all began, a plaque had been installed near Gate B-23. It didn't mention names or point fingers. Instead, it simply read, "From this gate, we learned that dignity is every passenger's right. May we never forget this lesson." The young college student who had first shared the video online was now interning with the FAA, helping develop social media campaigns about passenger rights. Sometimes the biggest changes start with one person being brave enough to stand up, she told a reporter. As the hearing concluded, the FAA official shared one final thought. 6 months ago, I boarded a plane hoping to document problems in our aviation system. Instead, I witnessed the beginning of a revolution in how we treat each other, not just in the skies, but everywhere we go. The applause that followed wasn't just for her words. It was for every passenger who had ever felt unwelcome, every crew member who had learned to do better, and every person who believed that change was possible. What started as one incident on one flight had become a movement for dignity and respect that would impact generations to come.